Climate Lab, which is a youth-led nonprofit supporting young people lead climate solutions across the world. We do that through policy, climate finance, and skills building. So uh, we are really excited to be bringing this conversation to you folks. And I'm excited to bring on my fellow panelists. So I'll be moderating the conversation today. We are joined by three incredible young folks who are really leading climate solutions across the world in their respective regions. So I'm going to ask Liam, Emmanuel, and Kevin to join me up on stage, and we'll get a rolling. Just for those watching us live, we are currently setting up a mic. Thank you for your patience. Mic test. Mic test. Perfect. Great. Thank you very much. All right, so we are joined by Liam on our right here. We're joined by Emmanuel. We're joined by Kevin here. I mean, I could, share a bio of them, but I think it'd be best if we heard it from them and in their own words. So I am going to invite perhaps Kevin to kick us off and share a little bit about yourself, what kind of work you lead, where is your region that you represent, the community that you feel the closest ties to, and looking forward to hearing about you.
Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Kevin Osa. I'm from Togo, and right now I'm currently the West African coordinator for AYIC. AYIC is the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. So all the youth climate movement from Africa, network. And then I have also my NGO that is called OJET, Organization of Youth Engaged for Sustainable Development. And with that organization, we have like a network at the Pan African level that it's more about a think tank, and then a country representation model that we have. We are sharing our vision for the sustainable development, and then there are some youths who are finding themselves included, and then they just drive action on the ground, and we are coordinating. And in Togo, we have a forum that is called Youth in Renewable Energy Forum and Youth Employment. So it is a forum that we establish so that to involve youth in decision making when we talk about energy and also that. I'll be coming back to that more in details. I give the floor to my colleagues to present themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Ameyao. I work with the Youth Climate Council Ghana. I'm the Communications and Outreach Officer for the Youth Climate Council. Essentially, the Youth Climate Council is the biggest youth network in Ghana, made up of over 1,000 young climate activists and youth-led organizations. And essentially, we empower young people with capacity building, training, and also resources to advance their advocacy at the grassroots level. So for my work at the Youth Climate Council, I'm just working to raise effective climate justice leaders. And so far it's been exciting working with young people, giving them the opportunity, the resources they need to be able to advance their work in terms of addressing climate change. I'm also a communication specialist. I volunteer with Care About Climate, and I'm also part of the Yongo Communication Working Group. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Liam Watts. A little bit about me. I grew up in Labrador, Canada, part of the subarctic region of Canada. I am Inuit from Nunatsiavut, and that is the region I will be representing tonight in this panel. Currently, I'm studying a Bachelor's of Mechanical Engineering at the Memorial University of Newfoundland. And I hope to use this education to pursue a career in product design, hopefully in an Arctic environment. And a bit about me, in regard to what climate solutions I work on. I've done a few work terms at a company called Smart Ice, which provides climate change adaptation tools in Arctic and Inuit communities. And I'm currently working on a project at the National Research Council where I'm developing a winter and ice roads monitoring vehicle. So a lot of cool things like that, and just like to thank Youth Climate Lab and Cryosphere Pavilion for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Folks can actually hold on to that. I'll just speak from here, actually. Thank you so much for sharing about the work that you're leading, the regions that you represent, the communities that you feel the strongest ties to. I think it's really interesting to see how everyone is bringing together different perspectives and how you're developing different resources and working in your own respective communities to support young people and bring climate solutions to the forefront. I'm curious to dive in. So, just for the folks who are joining us today and just joining us now, this is a session on cross-regional synergy, examining why it's important to have young people at the front of climate solutions, why it's important to have cross-regional synergy, and why it's important to have collaboration across regions as well. So, we have representatives from different organizations, as you've heard from their introductions, but we're going to dive into the questions if you folks don't mind. Okay, so the first question that I would be really interested to hear from, and perhaps we can start with Emmanuel for this first question. How are young people, especially when you're in your work at the council, how are young people building resilience within the region, and what are really its local and global impacts that you've noticed?
Thank you very much. So when you come to Ghana, Ghana is a very a highly vulnerable country when it comes to climate change. So the impact is very real on the ground. If you go to coastal communities in Ghana, they are losing their homes to tidal wave. Up north, there's water scarcity and a drought. And if you go to the middle belt, also farmers are struggling with productivity agriculture because they are primarily focused on rain-fed agriculture. And so with climate change, the rain pattern is changing and it's making it difficult. But the Ghanaian youth, young people in Ghana have taken the opportunity to also develop solutions, local-led solutions to address some of these impacts. And so for us at the Youth Climate Council, working with these young people, we initially connected with them and then categorized them into the different thematic areas which their work focused on. So we have people championing green jobs and solutions. We have young people who are also doing recycling and other key stuff which is helping address the issues. They also have an opportunity to do some sort of education. They go to the local communities and speak to farmers and help them with irrigation and other modern climate smart agriculture methods. And all these are things that young people in Ghana are trying to do to also try and reduce the impact of climate change. And so for me, it's also reflects on the power of the youth. One of the things that I've working with Youth Climate Council made me realize was that young people have the power to make the change. Young people have the technical know-how and the capacity when they are given the right support. And so just initially, this is what I can say in terms of the Ghanaian youth making some input in terms of climate smart agriculture, green jobs, and other innovation that they are championing to make sure that they complement the effort of the government in addressing climate change.
Thanks for that. And I love what you said about really the power of young people. And I think that really came through in the work that you were sharing. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to pass it on to Liam next. Liam, and at any point, if you folks need me to repeat the question, please don't hesitate to let me know. Happy to repeat it. But Liam, what do you think how are young people building resilience in your region that you're representing? And what are really its local and global impacts?
Yeah, thank you. So climate change in the Arctic is felt a little bit more than other regions in the world. So particularly with the melting sea ice, it's becoming more unpredictable to tell when the ice is safe to travel on. And especially in Arctic communities, Inuit, they rely on the sea ice and it's part of our livelihoods and hunting, traveling through community to community. So just by the youth experiencing this in real time and growing up in these conditions, they're building resilience because they're forced to live through these ever-changing conditions. And in other ways, they're building resilience. I'm seeing more and more youth in these communities reconnecting with their culture that was lost through colonialism and stuff like that. So when reconnecting with culture, it really helps build confidence. And by having this confidence and being true to themselves, it gives them the power to help tackle these climate change issues more impactfully. So yeah, it's very inspiring to see that. And as for their impact, I've been seeing they've been inspiring other youth in their communities to do the same, to reconnect with their culture, to educate themselves and others on climate change. And on a global scale, they're making their voices heard and representing the region, which is very important to draw specific attention to the Arctic when it comes to climate change. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Liam. Really appreciate how you were able to kind of bring in your lived experience as an Inuit, as an Inuk youth, and how your community has been impacted, and what kind of perspective that brings into how you think local and global impacts are felt based on how young people are leading climate solutions. Thank you. And Kevin, last but not least, what do you think?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Today when we have to talk about climate change, we need to think global but act local. It is very important because the issue we are having is not just me. I'm coming from Togo, but it's not just from Togo, or it's not just having in Togo. When you go to France, it's the same thing. When you go to Canada, it will be the same thing. You go to China, you may see climate impacts, but some of those issues are different, and according to the place or the country's realities. Okay, so in Togo, for example, we have a very big issue that is, people are looking for what they can eat at the end of the day. This is the first thing. And then we have climate change exacerbating their activities. So most of the people are farmers. So when you have climate change exacerbating their productivity or their activities they have to do so that to feed themselves, so you find people who normally the problem is not a social problem, but at the end you have a social problem because you have social issues because they are supposed to grow their harvest, but maybe you'll be having flooding, you'll be having droughts, and then at the end of the day, they will not have anything to harvest. So, but it is very difficult at the global level or in the negotiations to bring the issue of adaptation on the table because people from the north cannot understand because this issue is not happening on their areas. So they are just focused on what they know from the north region, and then it is very difficult to show them what is happening on the ground. And also because news are not really relating the issue on the ground. Sometimes people are just focused on what big medias are saying, but on the ground the issue is different. It's a little bit different about what people are saying. So I think young people are very creative. They have innovative projects, and they are very dynamic. We are trying to do our best on the ground, but sometimes there's a need of, at the political level, the politics don't really understand. They never put climate change as a priority. So when you are into climate change, maybe sometimes they just look at you and say, "Oh, you are doing this. Do you think people are listening to you? Do you think you are here when you are talking?" So sometimes they are just surprised because it's not a priority for them. But sometimes when you go to the ground, the consequences of climate change is very, it's very crucial, and then you face the issue on the ground. So you are convinced that something has happened. But some of the time, those political people are not really going to the ground. They are just seated in their offices, and then they are just having reports from the ground. And the same thing from the big NGOs or international organizations. They are not really on the ground. But for young people or young lead NGOs who are working directly with the communities, who knows the reality on the ground, they can tell you what's the truth. So I think that's the issue. But for them to get opportunity to come to the global level to talk or to share their views, it is very difficult. Even to get the visa, even to get the opportunity first, even to make everything happen, it is very difficult. So I think globally, this is what I can share with you in terms of how, as a youth from the global south, especially from Africa, we are trying to deal with the issue of climate change and how to bring it to the global level.
Great, thank you for that. I think you mentioned a really interesting point of how the global north is frequently unable to realize how severe climate adaptation needs are because we don't see it in our daily lives. But I'm sure, I think also what Liam had said earlier, that a lot of Inuit communities are facing drastic changes based on climate change and how their livelihoods are being impacted and how their cultures are being forced to kind of reassess how to understand and see the ice changing and things like that. So I think even within the global north, there's definitely a different wide range of the impacts and how people are understanding. So thank you for highlighting that. And I love that you really highlighted that young people are really creative. And this ties in really well, I think, into the next question, to which I'll actually start with you then, Kevin, since you have already kicked us off. But what are really the opportunities that exist for cross-regional work and for youth collaboration to work towards a just and climate resilient future? I know we talked about the unique skills that young people have, such as creativity, such as innovation, such as the ability to bring such energy into global spaces like these. But yeah, curious to hear what you think about the opportunities that are emerging or things that you have noticed so far.
Okay, thank you. The first thing is to raise that the opportunities are very hard. Okay, to get opportunity in this climate space is very hard. But the matter is, when you are focusedly working on something, it will come by the time. So sometimes you also need to be focused on what you are doing, and also make research and look for where the opportunities are. Even it is very difficult to get them. So, but I think from my experience, because I really like to share my experience when I'm talking about opportunities or a model to follow. First of all, we need to build our capacity, because sometimes we are just running after opportunities and we are not really the people at the right place. Traveling, going to the international event, talking is good, but is it your focus? Actually, now me, I'm focusing on adaptation. So if you talk about adaptation, you can see me. But mitigation is not my focus. Finance, not too much. But I'm doing finance for my organization, but it is not my focus. But my focus is adaptation. Why am I into adaptation? Because I'm coming from a community, and the people from the communities are facing climate change. I'm with them, I'm living with them, and I know very well their realities. So it is very easy for me to raise that issue and to convince people about what I have been living or what I have been seeing on the ground with the people on the ground. So I think we need to build our capacities first. We need to be part of a network. Yongo, Gayo, we have a lot of youth organizations that we can be part of. Then we can have access to information. We can have access to opportunities of capacity building. And we can also, and the other thing is also to be dynamic, because when you are not really dynamic, you cannot really get opportunities. So you need to be dynamic. You need to look for where the opportunities are and then apply for them. And then when you have luck, you'll be get selected, or maybe somebody will be recommending you for something. So it is also a matter of going to events to share your views, your experience, or to let your history be heard, or maybe get a job. It's also an opportunity to get a job, okay, to have something to do, or to be paid for a work you'll be doing. And what kind of opportunities else? I think, yeah, to create, also to in entrepreneurship, to create your own enterprise. So sometimes opportunities just come like that in the corner. You'll be getting an idea from sharing views from somebody else. Then you can start your own business and start having money from it. So basically, those are the opportunities that I can mention. I don't know if my colleagues have something
Yeah,
to add
I
on.
yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think what I'm really hearing is that I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about why our conversation's so siloed, and especially as you have mentioned, adaptation is a conversation on its own, absolutely. But you can't talk about adaptation without talking about loss and damage, and without talking about mitigation, without talking about engagement of those who are disproportionately impacted. So I think you've been really highlighting some of those key needs, and I think you also highlighted the need to fund young people to have access to these spaces. We know that climate finance is severely lacking for young people especially. So what does it mean to support young people through finances? It means providing jobs, it means providing opportunities, it means trusting young people to have access to opportunities and spaces as well. So thank you for highlighting that. And I would like to ask the same question to you, Emmanuel. What do you think the opportunities are for cross-regional partnership? What are the unique roles that young people play, especially in these conversations as well, towards a more just and climate resilient future?
Yeah, you mentioned cross-regional partnership. I believe that one of the things in the last few years I've looked at keenly is building that partnership between young people from the global north and the global south. I believe that there is power in unity. Once there's that kind of partnership, it gives the youth movement a much more visibility, and they're able to amplify their concerns. And within that partnership, we can be able to maximize the opportunities that come. What are some of these opportunities? One, you are within the space, obviously. There is an opportunity for capacity building, getting the opportunity to learn, enhance your knowledge base when it comes to the relevant issues of climate change. Oh, sorry. Apologize.
He's a busy man.
So you get the opportunity to enhance your knowledge base because you get to join these virtual events where they are talking about adaptation, biodiversity, and issues. And I kid you not, when it comes to the climate space, climate change itself is a complex issue. And so for young people to be able to make a meaningful impact and make their inputs and voices heard, you also need to build that capacity. And you can get that through that partnership between young people from different organizations but sharing the same interest. Again, there's also an issue of getting to learn and also create something because yes, we are trying to save the earth and all that, but through this whole activism, people have been able to create meaningful employment, jobs, green jobs, also create actual institutions that pay young people to utilize their knowledge and expertise. And that is also very relevant when it comes to partnerships and building that youth network where we can all rely on each other, and also gives you that sense of reliability, getting to draw inspiration from each other, share knowledge, share resources, and even to some point funding. Because in Ghana, with the network that we belong to, we get opportunity to share some of these funding with young people. And so we go into our network like, okay, there's funding for young people who are trying to do something on climate smart agriculture, and then we share with them, and then you get that. This year, two people got the opportunity to come to COP27 as youth negotiators from Ghana, and they got that through, again, this whole network and partnership. But it can be on a bigger scale in terms of the global space, young people coming together, building that powerful force, sharing knowledge, resources, learning, enhancing, and through that, all these other opportunities can be unlocked. And again, we can be able to demand more from the world leaders because we have a united voice, we have a united presence, and that also can be able to unlock more opportunities. So within the space, there are so many opportunities. Even though as activists we focus more on the impact of what we do, we also look at how we can personally, as an activist, build your personal development, enhance your knowledge, get access to finance to enhance your work, also create jobs, and also live off those jobs. I think that is what I can say in terms of the opportunities that are available within the space.
Yeah, Thank you for sharing that. And I do hope that the two youth negotiators on behalf of Ghana can share some of their learnings with the other young people to ensure that our messages and the recommendations that we're pushing forward, that we can learn from their experiences and use those knowledge as well. And thank you for sharing that powerful message about there's power in unity. Absolutely, I cannot agree more. Collective action is really the only way out of this. And I think especially when you mentioned cross-regional partnership, this in itself is also a cross-regional partnership, right? So now that we have sparked relationships, or we're deepening relationship in our case, Emmanuel, I think we are really just finding new opportunities to connect with each other as well. Okay, and last but not least, to you, Liam, what do you think the cross-regional opportunities are, and what are perhaps some of the unique positions that, or unique things about young people that makes them really qualified to lead this work?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities for cross-regional youth collaboration in big urban centers, especially in southern Canada, like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. But the reality is, as Kevin said, getting these opportunities are very hard for people who are underprivileged and underrepresented. In the Arctic, most communities are very remote. Some are only accessible by plane or boat seasonally, right? So getting these opportunities can be, near impossible for some, due to access to internet, access to education, and other social barriers like that. Fortunately, I've been very privileged to be here. This is a form of cross-regional collaboration with my fellow youth here on this panel. But yeah, it is very hard for many youth to get these opportunities. So I think more needs to be done to kind of foster and implement these sort of cross-regional opportunities especially for these underprivileged and underrepresented youth. And I think the Arctic and Africa, there's a lot of opportunity here for these collaborations, as geographically we're very different, but we share a lot of the same or very similar social issues, such as mental health or food insecurity. So I think sharing our perspectives like we are on this panel is very beneficial, and I would love to see more opportunities such as this one, just to get a deeper connection between these two regions. And and as for the unique role of youth, climate change it's been happening for a while, but very recently it's only been accepted as a truth, and we're all working against it to stop our planet from being destroyed. So the unique role of youth is that we're growing up in this reality that the earth is warming and that the climate is changing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's up to us to lead the future and to when young people are elected into governments or create startups, make their own companies, even now, as young people, it's important to break all of these barriers and inequalities that have been implemented in the systems that already exist. So it's very important to speak out against these and continue advocating, continue just pushing for climate action. And that is our role.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. I want to, if you don't mind, pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned there. I love what you mentioned about how remote a lot of your communities are, and how I really appreciate the insight you brought about how there's then less opportunities that you might have access to. Curious if you think, oh, are you bringing me a mic? Thank you. So I don't have to. Perfect. Thanks. Sorry about that. Thanks for being. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Thank you. Love what you said about that. But do you think then more collaboration needs to be made kind of within the global north as well? So now that we're living on what is colonially known as Canada, but you're living in your community is remote, and a lot of Inuit communities are in remote regions that can only be reached by plane. So how do you think it's possible to have that cross-regional collaboration in terms of kind of within the context of global north? So is it possible to have collaboration between northern Canada and southern Canada, and how do we foster that kind of relationship if we are so geographically apart?
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely possible, but there's just a lot that needs to be done first. I think first we just need education, right? in southern Canada, everyone knows about Toronto, Ontario. If you point at a map, ask any Canadian, they know where Ontario is, where Quebec is. But if you ask someone in a big city to point out I don't know, where is Nain, where is Iqaluit, where are these Arctic communities, most people wouldn't know. So I think it starts with education, right? We need to educate everyone on the Arctic and Canada's north as much as we do on the south. So I think, yeah, for these collaborations, we just need to communicate and connect with each other and understand each other
Absolutely.
first.
Yeah, thanks for that. I absolutely hear you on the education bit. And I imagine it's similar for you folks as well. So curious, I know you two are in different countries, but how have you connected with perhaps other regions of within the continent of Africa? If you have any thoughts and insights to share around how do we foster relationship and collaboration even within our own regions, because I find that there's also very different contexts as well. Anyone want to go first?
I think when we are all in the same field, or when we all have the same area of interest, we get knowing each other, because like as we are all in climate change, it is very easier to connect. And also today, by using social medias, it is very even on social medias, you can see profile of other people who are also in the same field of interest, and it is very easy to connect today. But I think for me, this is first of all the how we get knowing each other. Okay, we are friends on several social medias, and also when we try to share our activities on what we are doing on the ground, sometimes it is very easy to be connected with that social media network. So after, I think we can also meet at events like this. Okay, we can also try to network. But for me, partnership is a matter of field of interest first, because when we don't really find why we really have to collaborate or on what we should work, it is very difficult to be partner, because sometimes we can be partner, but the partnership will not be fruitful. But first of all, it's a matter of field of interest. When we know that this person is good into adaptation, we are doing a project and we need somebody who have a solid background on adaptation. So if the need is very clear, it's very easy to get in touch and also to work together. So for me, in terms of collaboration, networking, this is what I can say related to that. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of common things that I'm pulling from both your answer, Kevin, and both your answer, Liam, as well. Sounds like in order to be able to collaborate, you need to have awareness, and to have awareness, you really need education. Emmanuel, do you agree with that? Do you have any other things to
Yeah,
add?
yeah, absolutely. But you asked about partnerships within Africa, or yeah. So for Africa, I think what is happening now is a lot of young people from different African countries are coming together. You can cite an example of the African Youth Initiative for Climate Change. You can talk about the African Youth Mobilization for COP, which was launched, and they solicited funds to bring a lot of African youth to COP27. So far it's been exciting seeing all these partnerships, because we share a common interest in terms of coming together to address climate change. Um, it's estimated that millions of people in Africa will be pushed into poverty if the climate crisis unfolds, and so there's a higher risk, and there's that sense of urgency to come together. And once you come together, you can also appreciate. You must appreciate the context of the different um, differences that exist. Let's say francophone and anglophone. There are people who speak French, people who speak English, but how do we make sure that we merge in a way that we also look at their interest? There are other African countries who are a bit advanced in terms of mitigation and adaptation, and those who are much more below the poverty line. And so it's contextually, we need to look at it from a holistic perspective, making sure that even when we are making that partnership, somebody is not shortchanged, somebody's interest is not relegated. We need to make sure that it's much more inclusive and it caters for every demographic within the African continent. And for me, that is very key. But so far, what I've seen, it's exciting. Look, seeing more young people from Africa coming together. Earlier this year, I was in Egypt, met a couple of young leaders, climate leaders from Africa, built connection. We met again, and we are thinking of how we can come together to make it, to demand more from our leaders, and then of course from the world leaders. So I align strongly with what Kevin and my colleague here said in terms of education. We really need that education because there are people who don't have enough knowledge on climate issues. And so how do you tell somebody like that to partner with you? Already they are not aware. The climate awareness needs to be there. We need to educate people. And once you do that education, people, the next question they ask you is, how can I help? How do I come on board? Because then they understand that their future is at risk. What kind of earth are you going to inherit? Is it an earth that is resilient or an earth that is heavily polluted that cannot sustain your life? And so that education, once it comes, it strips up the interest, it generates that curiosity, and then people will begin to look at how they can also contribute in their own small way. And so for me, that is very, very key.
Great, thanks for that answer. I do want to pick up on something that you said, which is, you have to be able to communicate through common interests, through education, through awareness. That slides very well into my next question, which is, how do you communicate? Because I find that it doesn't always work if you're stating scientific facts to somebody who doesn't relate to those scientific facts, right? So you have to be able to meet people where they're at. And I think it's also very different when it comes to cross-regional communications as well. So first of all, it's a two-part question. First of all, how do you communicate with the people in your communities? What are some strategies that you use? Maybe there are specific issues that you really use to be able to communicate climate change. And I think a lot of people are exploring ways to talk about climate change without saying the words climate change. So how are you doing that in your own communities? And second, what are some communication strategies that we can use to be able to collaborate cross-regionally? If we do have such different impacts and understanding of what climate change means, how do we ensure that we can collaborate so that we can actually work together? And as somebody said earlier, we can really have that power and unity and be able to push an agenda together.
Yeah, I'll take the first question first. I've had the privilege of working as a comms officer for the Youth Climate Council. Before that, I worked as a journalist for some years, a climate journalist. So when it comes to climate change, there are categories of people. I'll use Ghana as a context. So in my advocacy and work on the ground, you meet Ghanaians who are feeling the impact of climate change, but they don't know it's climate change. And you have people who have a fair idea, they suspect or they think something is happening within the environment, but they are not really able to pinpoint. The trick here is to humanize the issue. You need to put a human face to climate change. You cannot discuss climate change in context in vacuum. And so there's a community in Ghana called Keta. So Keta, in the last few years, when you visit Keta and you speak to the community people, they tell you that, okay, 10 years ago, the sea was over there. Now it's here. When they point here, it means that it is close to their home. And they are wondering what is happening. Why is the sea coming in, caving in so close to them? Clearly, something is melting on the Arctic, increasing sea volume, the sea is expanding, and is wiping away coastal communities. And these people need to be able to understand that you are experiencing this because of climate change. There's a farmer, you speak to a farmer in Ghana, and they tell you we have the rainy season and the dry season. So in Ghana, the farmers plant their seeds and wait for the rainy season. Once the rain comes, and then it's fertilized, and then they germinate and all that, and they get their crops. Now, when it gets to the rainy season, the rain is not coming. And so the seeds die. And then they lose their productivity, and then they lose their produce, and then they are beginning to wonder what is happening. 10 years ago, when I plant in January, by March it's raining, and then everything is setting rolling. So a lot of the discussion about climate change has been very scientific, very complex. But when we begin to put a human face to it, when we link the issue of climate change to how it is impacting people's life, how it is altering their economy, their economic livelihood, then they begin to really feel they really feel attached to it, and they begin to understand how this thing is really going to hurt them and their families and their livelihood. And so, for the first trick is to make sure that you link it and give us a human face. Also, we need to visualize climate change. If I am discussing climate change to somebody in a community in Ghana, I have no business showing a picture of a polar bear on an ice. They can't relate to it. Somebody in the Arctic can relate, but in Ghana, they can't relate to that. And so once we visualize it as well, we need to use imagery that connects to them for them to really understand how this thing is also affecting their life. I mean, when I say this thing, the climate change, and those are the key issues that can really help. And also, I think that there's a lot of doom and gloom when it comes to climate change. We always talk about, oh, like the world is going to end in the next 2 years. We need to also communicate in a way that inspires hope. People, when you talk to people at the end of everything, they need to be inspired to take action. They need to be inspired to say that, how can I contribute? A lot of time is about the negatives, which is fine, because we need to also make people understand that there's a sense of urgency with this climate crisis. But let's also, when communicating, you also need to find balance between the positive and the negative, so that people know that even despite the gloom and doom, there is hope. We have the capacity to change. We have the capacity to implement strategies that would alter and change things for good. So those are initially what I can say. The second question, I missed it out a bit. I don't know. I think maybe if you want to repeat.
Yeah, so how do we communicate with other regions? So you have mentioned earlier that some images around climate change, like a polar bear sitting on a melting ice cap, it doesn't relate to those in Ghana. So how do you communicate those struggles, and how do you be able to connect? And as you mentioned earlier, be able to visualize that change as well.
Yeah, I think that there's country specific modules that everybody can use in terms of appreciating, just like my brother, appreciating the context in which the country operates and how you can communicate in that way. I'll give you a typical example. Let's say if you go to a place like Kenya, there are things that you say in Kenya that might not necessarily apply in Ghana, and there are things that will apply in Ghana might not necessarily apply in Togo. And so with that, it's a bit difficult, but it's more about finding the right connection. Because if you are from Canada and I am from Ghana, how do we what interest do we have? We share a common interest. And so definitely we will have to look at how we can categorize people. I can speak more to somebody from Brazil about forestry, the Amazon, because in Ghana we also have huge forests, and there's deforestation, and there's also deforestation happening in Amazon in Brazil. So we need to look at Canada, what is really impacting Canada now, and I can speak to that. If I meet somebody from Brazil, then I know that there's also this issue. If you go to another place, there's plastic pollution or whatever. So let's appreciate the impact of what the country is really struggling with, and then we can align the conversation or the communication model to fit in that context. I think that is what I think we can do here.
Fantastic. Lots of things to think about based on your answer there, Emmanuel. So Liam, what does speak to you as somebody living in Canada? Yeah, curious to hear about your thoughts there. And I maybe want to preface this conversation. I had a privilege of talking to an Inuk elder, and she mentioned to a group of students from Micronesia saying how sad it is that the melting of our homes are flooding yours, and that really spoke to me. And I think that really connects back to the heart of this conversation that we're having today. So how does the melting of your homes impacting African countries, and how does everything connect, and how do we communicate with other regions that might not necessarily understand what climate change might look like in our own communities?
Thank you. Yeah, like the Earth is one big ecosystem. Like everything works together. So the melting of the Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets will definitely flood islands and coastal regions across the globe. So, although, very different places on the globe, still climate change affects them in the same way. The destruction of our homes and our lands and our nature. So, I think it's very important that when we are in these cross-regional collaborations, we need to understand each other first of all. We can't get to work if we don't understand mutually the strengths and struggles of each other's backgrounds and countries. We have to take the time to really understand and appreciate um, where we are different, where we are similar, and where we can go from there. And as for communicating, um, I think a really underutilized and underappreciated method of communication between um, other regions is through art and culture. I think that is a way that can it really brings people together. By sharing our cultures, by sharing our art, we can just appreciate each other on a deeper level. And I think that is the way to go when talking about climate change.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I think art and culture is something that hasn't been brought up in this conversation yet, but so critical. Do you have any examples that you can think of at the top of your head? I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but yeah, some examples of how perhaps might have that you might have contributed to, or you've seen other folks in your communities really use and harness art and culture to communicate that message. If you have any examples.
Actually, yeah, I have a very recent example. Here at COP27, our delegation went to the Green Zone a couple days ago, and there was a booth that showcased art made by Egyptian students. So these students created displays of climate change and how it affects them using their own art styles and in the Egyptian context. And I thought it was cool to just see how they could communicate what they're going through their art.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So we'll definitely have to check that out, all of us. But I think that also really connects back to what Emmanuel was saying about the need for hope. And, we are really living in the time of climate doomism, but how do we transform that and use that, the grief and the sadness that it brings us, and really be able to transform it into joy and hope, and be driven by hope as well. Kevin, curious to hear your thoughts on how do we communicate with other regions, and if you have any further examples on using and harnessing art and culture, if you feel comfortable just speaking on that.
Okay, so communication is very important because the issue that is happening is not something that um, it is an urgency. Okay, it is actually happening, and the impacts are so crucial. So communicating is very, very important at this time. So how we do communicate with other regions, I think I was saying that it's a matter of realities that we have in common, because uh, something that is happening in the Western is not the same in Africa, for example. So uh, like we have drought, but if we have drought in North region, it will not be necessarily the same thing. Or maybe we have flooding, but I think flooding is the same thing everywhere. Okay, when we are talking about last time there was flooding in Belgium, France, and also in Germany, there was a kind of flooding like that. So then people understand that there is an issue. Even those who were not aware about climate change, they will have an idea about how do flooding coming now to our our living place. So they will be reflecting on this. So, but with the community, I hear the question the question was initially about that. As an NGO, how do we communicate with communities so that they can understand? My brother just answered one part of the question, but I think the most important thing is to have the same language, or to speak the same language with the community, because I was saying that we have most of the communities we have are small farmers. The people are farmers, so they don't really understand French. But we have been colonialized. So most of our countries are colonialized countries. So we don't really talk in our local tongue. So we don't have our own language. So we have been obliged to speak French. So when you go through a community where, like, you are an NGO and you want to partner with the community, or you want to do actions, you want to support women, for example, and we are talking in French, maybe some 1 and 2 person will be hearing you. So you need to go into local language so that they can understand. Me, for example, my local language is Ewe. On some project, when we go to build the capacity of rural women or of rural young people, we need to talk away to them so that they can understand the message that we bring to them. If not, they'll be just seated and just looking like they are understanding something but nothing, because they don't really go to school, or maybe they never attend school. So I think this is the first thing. We need to speak the same language with the community. We need to know their realities also, because sometimes they when they are living something and you just come with like an example of something for the global north, or for the region from the north, they'll be just looking to the I don't know, to the picture, but they won't understand what you bring to them. But if you take an example from their works, like if they are into agriculture, and you take an example from their agricultural working, so they will understand that more than having something for about. So I think communication is very important, but we need to have the right message and also the right tone, so that the people that we are trying to reach out to, they can really understand us and get the message we bring to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And I know you spoke about language in a very literal sense, but I would like to also speak the same language in a more metaphorical sense as well. So how do we actually get down to the actual things that impact their lives, and in the concepts and the ways that they can understand best? So not only are we actually speaking the same language and really expanding what kind of languages that we use to be able to communicate, but also the concepts that we use and how we choose to communicate those messages, I think is really important. We're reaching the end of our panel. Just curious to see if anyone out in the crowd has any questions. Now is your chance to ask your burning questions for our wonderful panelists. And I have an individual back there. I will run back to you there. If you could share your name, affiliation, and question.
Hello, my name is Sebastián Ruiz. I'm from Chile, from Catholic University. I'm a postdoc researcher. I come here with the Cryosphere Pavilion as well. So my question is in regard to the youth in general, when it's involved in activism, is under the threat of being manipulated by either, for example, right-wing think tanks or NGOs who often have certain ideological biases. So in terms of the autonomy and to legitimate the effort and the activism as such, what would you recommend as individuals, young individuals, to avoid any interference with your truthful and genuine premises?
So the question was in kind of within the current political and social context of the rise of far right, and also with a lot of moving pressures and those with a lot of varying interests trying to change the narrative of climate change. How do you navigate that, and how do you ensure that you are still able to speak truth to your lived realities and be able to work towards climate action?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's a very complex one there. It is a big issue, and it's very unfortunate that a lot of people in our society still don't accept climate change to be a fact. You know, there's people who think it's a hoax. They don't care. They don't want to do anything about it. And unfortunately, these people who speak out against climate change, sometimes they are successful in convincing others that it is fake. So it is, on the rise. So it's very important to, as climate change activists, to speak out against this. But I think the best way to approach this is through just like kindness and communication. We could, if there was, if I was encountering someone like this who was bashing climate action and was against it, it wouldn't do anything to just argue with them all day. That would probably just, make us both separate us even more and create more division. I think the best way would be to try and get mutual understanding and connection through respect and through education. We could have a civil conversation about it and present some facts. Unfortunately, some people are very, very tough to get through with climate change, but yeah, that's how I would approach it.
Thanks for that question, or thanks for that question and the answer, actually. Did you two want to respond to the question at all?
Give a kind of view that I have. I think activism is matter of what we believe, and also the goals that we need to achieve. But I think from our side, most of the climate activists from West Africa, it's also a matter of communities that are suffering, and then we are engaged to raise their voices. So I think it is mostly that. And in this contest, we have a kind of political contest that is specific to our region, that as an activist, you need to consider. For me, for example, I never go on the road in my country to march for the climate. I have never done that. Why? Because of our political contest in Togo. It is not permitted, even having an okay on a recipe to march. You need to write a letter to the minister. But I have been telling you that we have politics, or we have people that are not really understanding climate change. Climate change is not their reality, their focus. So why are you writing them letter to march? But march in terms of politics have another signification. They have another understanding. So the reason you want to march, what is it about? Are you marching so that where they are getting, maybe you are telling them that they don't have enough funding to finance, where they are getting the money, even when they get a little money, they are thinking about buying their big cars instead of going to the community to do project on it. It is very important as an activist to consider the political context. It is very different from region to region. In Canada, for example, I can see that every month or every time that I use on the roads, keeping banners to go onto the road and telling people that they need to change politics, they need to change the system. It is good. But from our side, you need to be strategic. Maybe it can be an action that we can do as a network, but we need to be we need a lot of people to go on the road. But it is very low, okay, to see young people from a country like Togo, French-speaking country like Togo, to go to the road to ask for climate justice or something like that. But for me, as an activist, I think there are other ways to do that. Okay, if we have actually now I'm a negotiator for Togo. I'm into adaptation and following the global goals on adaptation. So it has not been easy. My background is in civil society. Even now, I'm still working in civil society. But how do I do to support the government or to have the voice of vulnerable community on the table of negotiations? So I think sometimes you need to have the right message and to keep the government understand, or you need to do an advocacy so that they can understand you and involve you and what they are doing, and then you can keep the voice of vulnerable communities at the table. But if you want to go to the road, it can be another matter. Anything can happen, and in our countries, much have another understanding, and it's not far from I don't know how you call it, but we call something gas lacrimogene. It's not far from gassing people on the roads. So thank you. This is what I can tell you about the.
Yeah. There'll always be climate deniers. There'll always be people who would challenge you as an activist. But I also believe that your activism should come in a context. When you practice as an activist, there are certain areas that you need to understand the dangers that associates with that, and then you are aware. You don't act like because you're a climate activist, you can just do anything, go to any community, just start your advocate. There are times where even in Ghana, when we go to communities, we need to talk to the chief or the local leader and then seek permission before we get to the community members. All these nuances we need to appreciate as activists, but most importantly, we also need to identify the climate deniers, those who are always bringing like some negative energy to our activism, and find a way to navigate that. And sometimes to just like a friend here said, it's more about persuasion, trying to convince them, trying to talk to them. There are people who genuinely we were all raised differently. There are people who believe in certain things, people who believe in different things. But with your activism, you need to show some compassion and be more willing to teach people, or be open to educating them more than criticizing them. If you meet somebody and they say they don't believe in climate change, maybe you need to engage them more. You can't just condemn them to feel like, sorry, you can't just condemn them to feel like, why don't you believe in climate change? You need to engage the person, try and convince them, talk to them. Then they feel like, okay, this person is really interested in me. And then they also open up. And then through that, we've had several instances where we've gone to communities, we've spoken to people. Initially, they had a perception climate change is a white man thing. It's something that the West is tricking you guys. Nothing like that happens. You talk to them, you create instances, you are very patient, you explain, and then they begin to feel like, oh, okay, so this is why ABCD is happening in our community. But this is why when I go to the farm, this is happening. Okay, this is why our homes, the sea is washing away our homes. So it's we that when there's a need to be radical, you can be radical. When there's a need to be more flexible as an activist, you also need to be flexible, understand the context in which you operate, the community. You can even take into consideration their religious beliefs and cultural beliefs, so that you don't offend people when you go and talk to them and you condemn their practice, a practice that has been there for 100 years and over. You instantly condemn it and start speaking negative. You are not going to really make progress as an activist. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That's it for our panel today. I think we heard a lot of really great insights just around, really understanding the local context of the conversations that we're having and how that's so important to communicating the issue as well. And also heard a lot about the need for education and awareness and collaboration through different ways of communicating with each other. And I think we've also heard a lot about how we need to be aware of the various factors that go into collaboration and partnership, not only across regions but also within our regions as well. So thank you to all three of our panelists for sharing their incredible insights. They'll be around. I don't know if they need to jet off somewhere, but maybe not jet off, walk off somewhere. But yeah, thank you again, everyone, for sticking around. You can rewatch this many times afterwards. It'll be recorded and live streamed. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, and have a great night.